This is the Iran of the 70s, where people listen to rock and roll, wear miniskirts, and dance the twist. And this is modern Iran. In this video, they also dance. However, for this dance without a hijab, the young couple was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison for corruption and vice with the intent to undermine national security. What has changed in 40 years, and is everything really as scary and horrible as you imagine? What is it like to live in a country where almost everything is forbidden, but at the same time, everything is allowed? Today, I will tell you how Iran, after the 1979 revolution, made its country one of the most strict in the world. How, in a country where everything is banned, everything can be obtained, and how the Iranians themselves have adapted and learned to live under sanctions. After all, bans exist only to circumvent them. Hello! This is the backside of Iran, which is not described in any guidebook. Let's go! To begin with, let's see how it all started. Let's turn our guide back a few pages. After all, the starting position was simply excellent. Iran, or Persia, had a very favorable location. It was a crossroad of trade routes. On the one hand, access to the Caspian Sea, on the other, through the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. Persia was the center of trade around the world. In addition, the country had huge reserves of natural resources. Today, about 5% of all metals are found in Iran. It ranks second in the world in terms of natural gas reserves, and it has 3 times more oil than the United States and 6 times more than Qatar. And all of that was led by Shah Mohammad Pahlavi, as the country had an absolute monarchy until 1979. In 1963, the Shah took a pro-Western course and declared a white revolution. That direction was supported by the people, as 99.3% said yes to the course in a referendum. Big changes began in the country. Many Western companies entered the market, innovations in production and technology appeared, and reforms in education were announced. In the 70s, Iran was called the Paris of the East. Women were teaching in schools and passing laws, and hundreds of thousands of Iranians were studying at Western universities. Everything seemed to be going well, but there has always had another side. In fact, the Shah was a very poor leader, stealing and not solving real problems. A large set of reforms was exclusively for the urban elite. When reforms came to villages, many residents were left unemployed because tractors did everything for them. Millions of the poor went to the cities for a better life, but there was no work or social security there. As a result, Tehran began to grow into slums. The peak was the party organized by the Shah in 1971 in honor of the anniversary of the Persian Empire. For the 3-day celebration, a real city with tents was built, 15,000 trees and 50,000 songbirds were imported. Heads of 65 states came to the party, and journalists estimated the costs at $100 million. Locals were shocked by the cost, to put it mildly. In addition, the country spent a lot of money on foreign advisors. In 1977, $10 billion was spent for this purpose. These expenses began to eat up to 25% of the annual budget, instead of being used to develop the economy. The average salary of a foreign specialist was $10,000, and this was at a time when the purchasing power of the dollar was much higher than it is now. Dissatisfaction with the reforms and the pro-Western culture, which was simply something supernatural to Islam, was growing in the country. When economic growth stopped by the end of the 70s, pro-Islamic leaders very skillfully used the mood of the dissatisfied masses of people and offered them the idea of a traditional Islamic state where everyone would be happy. In 1979, a revolution took place in Iran, the Shah flees, and Ruhollah Khomeini came to power, becoming the country's first spiritual leader. Western businesses were expelled from the country, strict Islamic laws were introduced, and women's rights were severely restricted. In addition to business, universities and schools were closed. Interestingly, that time an open referendum was held and the people were again asked if they wanted changes. 99.8% said yes. And this was not surprising. because Khomeini promised many good things: complete freedom from interference from other states, free gas and water, free education and medicine. But where did the sanctions come from? And it happened in November 1979 when Islamists seized the US Embassy in Tehran, took 66 hostages, and demanded the return of the Shah. As a result, the diplomats were held hostage for 444 days. In response, America imposed a ban on the purchase of Iranian oil, on the supply of any goods except essential goods, and froze $12 billion in Iran's accounts. A slight easing of sanctions restrictions was achieved in 2015 when the nuclear deal was signed. But in 2017, the new Trump administration announced new sanctions against Iran. Until February 24, 2022, Iran was the world leader in terms of the number of sanctions, but the country itself had a huge number of restrictions and bans. There was a ban on oil trade, a ban on the purchase of technology, no Western brands were officially allowed, and the internet was restricted. A very large number of prohibitions and freedoms affected women in particular. Women couldn't fly abroad without the permission of their father, husband, or brother. You couldn't sing on stage, you couldn't rap, you couldn't drive a motorcycle, you couldn't kiss your boyfriend on the street, you couldn't go out without a hijab, you couldn't go out with short sleeves, you couldn't check into a motel room with a boyfriend, and there were many other prohibitions. For example, the ban on singing on stage is interesting. Women were forbidden to do that because men liked it that way, but you could sing if a man sang with you. In mid-September 2022, the Iranian police arrested a 22-year-old girl, Mahsu Ameni, for wearing a hijab incorrectly. In the police station, Mahsu was beaten and died a day later. On the same day, people rallied at the hospital where Ameni was treated, and a week later, rallies spread throughout Iran. Women tore off their hijabs, burnt them, and cut off their hair in protest. The rallies turned into protests, and people demanded the overthrow of the regime. Within a few months, about 14,000 people were arrested and at least 458 were killed. During this time, the Iranian authorities learned how to deal with protests. That scheme had already worked out during the protests against the increase in gasoline prices. The government shut down the internet and brutally suppressed the uprising with blood and murder. At the same time, of course, it blamed the external enemy for everything. No matter what field you chose, finance, sports, culture, etc., you would face prohibitions and restrictions everywhere. Alcohol, satellite TV, personal blogs, Western movies, etc. were banned. But here's another example. The fines for not wearing a seatbelt were much higher than the fine for being in a car without a hijab. Therefore, most Iranian women did the following. They put on the hijab in the car, but the most paradoxical thing was that when they got out of the car, they took it off. Why, you may ask? In Iran, you can meet girls with their heads uncovered? Yes, you can. But we've just told the story of Mahsu. Now we are getting to the most interesting part. After all, in Iran, the rule, what is forbidden is permitted, is unspoken. Now we are on the other side of Iran. But first, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories about other countries. After 40 years of sanctions and bans, Iran has learned to live with them and, most importantly, to circumvent them. This happens both at the level of the government and at the level of ordinary people. For example, here's how it works at the state level. In 2018, the United States imposed an embargo on Iranian oil, which means that no one in the world can buy it. What was actually happening? The tanker left Iran, turned off the transponder, and transferred the oil to another tanker under the flag of another country. They could then sell the oil to anyone, although the main buyer was China. It was also forbidden to sell dollars to Iran, and indeed, officially, an ordinary citizen of the country can buy no more than $2,200 a year. But in reality, there are $3 rates in the country. The official market rate is the rate you can find in exchange offices, and the unofficial rate at the so-called money changers. You can buy as many dollars as you want from them, and their services are popular because buying dollars, gold coins, and real estate is a good investment. After all, the country has very high inflation. There were years where it reached 40%. It is interesting that the national currency is rial, but all locals use the old currency of tomans on price tags because there are fewer zeros. Loans are also prohibited in Iran, but you can buy, say, a car not for $10,000, but for $15,000 in installments, and this is no longer a loan. I have already said that all foreign brands are officially banned. That's why brands like Samsung, LG, Sony, Apple are in Iran, but not officially. This equipment is imported into the country and sold in shopping centers. There are no prohibitions or copyrights. It is unlikely that the brands themselves know that they are present in the Iranian market. Do you understand what is happening? On the one hand, it's forbidden, but on the other hand, you can turn a blind eye. You can get everything. If something is not available in Iran, you can always order it from Turkey or Azerbaijan, and special people called buyers will bring it to you. Social networks are not banned as such, but there are restrictions so that you use them less. That's why all locals use VPNs to get around this restriction. Interestingly, until recently, the spiritual leader of Iran had an official Instagram profile with 5 million followers. I wonder if he also used a VPN. Here's another clear example with alcohol. Alcohol is not just banned, it is strictly prohibited. The first time someone sells it, they cut off a finger, and the fifth time, they cut off the entire hand. There are no bars or clubs in the country, but at the same time, every Iranian knows where and from whom to buy alcohol. It is produced at home and then sold. These sellers are called dealers. Iran has strict rules, but that doesn't mean that everyone gets caught. There are two sides to Iran. The state prohibits many things, but it also turns a blind eye to many things, especially private life, as long as you don't undermine the political system. But what about the example with the couple at the very beginning of the video, you might ask? This is to keep you on your toes. This is a kind of unspoken balance of power. As I said from the very beginning, Iran has a very large economic potential, but the country's economy is not growing. Today, Iran's GDP is $360 billion, which is $4,401 per person. This is the level of Lebanon or Sri Lanka. If Iran were to develop its potential, it could compete with countries like Germany, Japan, and even the United States. But the government is choosing a completely different dark path. Thank you for watching and see you soon.